Welcome to our panel discussion on getting started with civic engagement activities in the classroom. I'm joined today by three panelists whose experiences in civic engagement cover a wide range of political science subfields, institution types, and courses. On the panel today, we have Amy Risley, the Stanley J. Buckman Professor of International Studies at Rhodes College, Monique Marinesco, Professor of Political Science at the University of Hawaii, West Oahu, and Ian Anson, Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I'm William Obrochta, Assistant Professor of Political Science at Texas Lutheran University and the Director of Professional Development for the APSA Civic Engagement section, and I'll be moderating this discussion. The goal of today's panel is to learn about how faculty in different contexts have integrated civic engagement activities and exercises into their courses. Our hope for today is that this panel will provide viewers with practical advice for getting started with civically engaged work in the classroom and also provide some inspiration for them to begin doing so. So I wanted to start off just by asking each of the panelists to spend a couple minutes introducing themselves, describing a bit of your journey to getting started with civic engagement and how you've thought about introducing it in the classroom. So I'll start with Amy. Thank you all for being here. And Amy, please introduce yourself.
Thank you. And thanks for convening this fine group of people on this panel. We're all excited to get underway. So my own journey getting started with civic engagement came when I first was interested in designing a community engaged course on comparative politics. And I was interested in focusing on social movements. So it was a comparative course on social movements and advocacy and activism. That was back in 2016. And the course focuses on social movements both in the United States as well as overseas, especially movements that kind of are driven by communities who have been politically marginalized on the basis of class, race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, etc. And so I was interested in designing the course so that the students would do roughly 18 to 20 hours of community-based learning throughout the semester. So they were able to volunteer in local organizations. I am in a city, I'm in Memphis, Tennessee, so we have quite a number of possible organizations. So I focused on ones that serve and empower Latinx communities, migrants and refugees, people in situations of homelessness, and some other communities here in Memphis. So the course was basically, it kind of came out of an expectation, I would say, at Rhodes College, which is a liberal arts college that has a national reputation as a service-oriented school. So when I first designed and taught the course, at that time, we were getting all of these #1 and #2 rankings, and everyone was all excited, service-oriented college, and most engaged in community service, and most service hours, and service. You get the idea. So I was inspired by that, but I also was mindful that my own Department of International Studies had not really created an opportunity to do community engaged learning with a global or comparative twist, I guess, or dimension to it. So I wanted to contribute that. I wanted the course's main objective to be pretty straightforward, which was to think globally and act locally. So that was my little slogan, as it were. And I just have to do a quick shout out because my course would not have been possible had it not been for the Mellon Foundation. They had a faculty innovation fellowship that some of us at Rhodes received in 2014 and 2015. So we had a community of practice, and we all met and discussed how to take risks with our teaching and how to innovate our pedagogies. And so that community of practice was interdisciplinary. It had faculty, staff, and students involved. It was really novel at the time, and it was absolutely wonderful. So I don't think I would have been able to proceed without that help and support.
Monique, what about your experiences?
Sure. So I've been teaching a class called Politics of Food since 2007. And that class at the time was geared towards, well, all of our students, most of our students are non-traditional students. So it was geared for working professionals, maybe going back to school for whatever reason. And so it was originally a Friday night lecture and a Saturday morning, theoretically, also lecture. And I thought, I can't lecture for 6 hours straight. That is just not possible. So I thought, we've got to figure out what to do with these students, and something that's going to keep them awake because they're exhausted at the end of a long week of work. And so I basically decided to include service learning, which then sort of morphed into more of a civic engagement perspective. And the idea, because it's a politics of food class, I don't know how much you know about the Hawaii food system. My sense is probably not much because it's not, your area of expertise, but we import about 85 to 90% of our food, and which causes all kinds of problems, especially with disasters. I don't know if you know about the, Maui wildfires, and so, any kind of hurricane or anything like that impacts the, potentially impacts the way we receive food. So the idea was to get our students involved in understanding the food system, obviously, but also to be able to see how different community partners might be addressing the problems with the food system. So what I tried to do was to take them to different kinds of food system related sites. So not just farms, right? Although we do go to, an organic farm, like a production farm, but we also go to school gardens and we help them, build garden boxes for the first graders. We've gone to homeless shelters and helped them build garden boxes. I've sometimes gotten grants, but most of the time, I've also done it out of pocket or whatever, where, I get materials and then we, build the boxes on site. We go to, now there's more, since 2007, things have changed pretty significantly. There are more community partners, more nonprofit organizations with whom we can partner and really showcase the different ways that the food system can be more resilient and be more, geared towards the people who actually live here, the residents, rather than the tourists and their fancy foods in the resorts and so forth. So there's a lot of, it's so political. It's a really great way to show that politics is in our everyday life, to show that the work that we do and work that these community partners are doing really impacts our everyday lives. And I thought that making that connection for the students really would, sort of bring it home in whether it's the course evaluations or even in their analysis papers. Students will be like, oh my God, I lost a bunch of weight. I stopped going to McDonald's. I stopped, I just really rethought the way my family ate. So it really has an impact on their daily life. That experiential learning has been really critical in sort of bringing the political science home, and that education home. And so to me, that's been really rewarding. And I'm still doing it. And I've actually added a companion class called Politics of Water, where we go to water related sites because you can't really have food without water. And so it's been really rewarding. And it's been, a really long journey. And we'll talk about it later, but it's morphed a little bit over the years. So I'm excited to talk about that. And thanks for having us and thanks for convening the panel.
Ian.
Yeah, I'll echo the words of thanks. I'm really glad to be here and happy to talk a bit about my journey and forays into sort of civic engaged learning. I would say that my sort of path to this topic and the integration of these ideas into the classroom really came as I struggled to become a more effective instructor, especially hitting the tenure track at UMBC, starting out right out of grad school. So UMBC is a fairly unique institution. It's a minority serving institution located in Maryland, just outside of the city of Baltimore. It's also a Carnegie Research One university. So in my a lot of research demands also to be a very effective instructor, and to be an instructor that serves a very diverse community, and one that has interests, right, that really speak to the location right outside of Washington, and obviously to the location here in Baltimore. And so as I kind of hit the ground, I sought to try to first of all understand and to evaluate how teaching can be more effective. I'm somebody who's a big proponent of the scholarship of teaching and learning. I really like to evaluate my teaching rigorously using the social science tools that I've been trained to use in my own research. I think it's a really great thing that a lot of folks should be and are doing in the discipline. And in doing so, I stumbled across a vein of literature, especially in writing studies, that talks about the notion of meaning making. And so this is something that really resonated with my students as I talked to them, and especially as I got more classroom experience through my path to tenure. And it was really all about the notion that students write assignments for the very basic goal of just getting a grade. And these assignments are usually pretty flimsy, I guess, in terms of the student's motivation to actually create them. And so it was perhaps no surprise that often I was seeing sort of just a lack of buy-in in some of these assignments. You could tell that there were students out there that were kind of just mailing it in, saying, well, I'll just do what's minimally required of me. I've got a lot of other things going on. And so I really started to think about this literature and how to redesign my courses in ways that got students thinking not just about me as the audience of their work, but as a broader audience, a political audience perhaps, and also an audience that's related to the communities, the national political stage that's very close to us in our backyard, and then also the local communities that people are coming from, all in the many counties in Maryland and the surrounding region. And so I tried to implement that essentially broadly in as many courses as I could. And perhaps this is a kind of broaching a subject for a later question, but it's not always easy, right, to come up with assignments and come up with sort of protocols in your classes to be able to engage students in a way that causes them to encounter more than one audience. But I've thought about ways to do that in very small ways, like for example, an introduction to American politics course, just kind of redesigning small 3 to 5 page writing assignments to change people's roles and the way that they role play in those assignments, all the way up to I teach an advanced data analysis class, sort of research methods to the next level sort of class for students that are very interested in perhaps using data in their political careers and ambitions in the future. And in that class, we worked exclusively with community organizations to do data analysis for them. So they would hand us large data sets that they weren't able to clean or able to use because they simply didn't have the person power to be able to perform that analysis. And we ingested that data and then spent essentially the entire semester working in a team, kind of as a data consulting firm, role playing that is, to be able to provide some insights to those groups. And so we've worked with, for example, the Choice program here at UMBC is a group that works with at-risk youth in the Baltimore City area and surrounding areas where they live in maybe in high crime areas or in areas where there's concentrated poverty. And so this is a nonprofit that essentially seeks to intervene in these kids' lives and just simply check in with them. They don't really do much training or education. They're simply there to provide this kind of backstop of support and to say, hi, how are you doing? And so with each of these visits, they generate data, basically, that creates this enormous sort of fire hose of data that they simply don't have the capacity to analyze. And so that was one project we did. We also partnered with the Maryland Food Bank in the most recent semester to figure out the effects of a SNAP sort of a policy cliff that we were facing, where many folks are aware that the sort of post-COVID SNAP benefits went away very suddenly. And so we took some data actually from the Census Pulse survey and analyzed the effects on Marylanders' sort of food security. And so obviously those are way more involved projects. I think I might have. Can you hear me? Okay, great. So yeah, those are obviously far more involved projects relative to just sort of retooling 3 to 5 page writing assignment. I've also done exit polling and some other different things in courses designed around the subjects of public opinion and voting behavior. Certainly I can talk a bit more about some of those efforts, but again, really the broad theme here is to try to get students to think about not just me as the audience of their assignments, but really to think about an audience that matters to them. And so whether it's the state of Maryland and reporting on the results of an exit poll surrounding a gubernatorial election, or a nonprofit in the area. That's been something I've really tried to integrate. And I've done some sort of closing the loop on that with some scholarship of teaching and learning. And I've been really delighted to see that it's sort of paid dividends in terms of students' sort of affect and engagement in the course, and also some of the learning objectives. So yeah, it's been a really fun journey. I won't say that it's without a significant amount of trial and error, and certainly a lot of a sort of extra labor. But I really do think that there's a tremendous upside for faculty that are interested in bringing stuff like this into their classrooms.
Well, thank you all so much for the introduction. And I think you already have been hitting on some of the main themes for the session, which are, what are some of the benefits? And what I heard was kind of twofold. Amy was talking about that benefit of being able to get in a community of practice and to reinvigorate some of your own teaching, and to think about ways in which you might, as Ian was talking about, become a better teacher, or think about those classes more intentionally for the first time. And then second, thinking about it from the student perspective, how do we make it more related, relevant to students? Monique's example of saying, well, this is a unique population that we have in this context, and here's one way we can serve them more effectively. Or, as Ian, you were talking, I teach our data analysis class. And again, an important part, as you were mentioning, was helping students get out into the community, and as a part of a project that they participate in, seeing where that data is collected, analyzed, and how we can deliver a product to them. So I think that relates to the next question, which was really just about the benefits for doing all this work, which we've acknowledged already, and we'll talk about that more, but the benefits for including civic engagement in your courses. This could be for students, institution, anybody, just other benefits that we haven't really hit on yet.
We could maybe start with student benefits, if that's okay with everyone else. But I would like to return to maybe our professional, development too, because that is really crucial. Because ultimately, if we're not happy and engaged and enjoying ourselves and pushing ourselves, then our students aren't going to really benefit too much from our teaching either. So I see those things as very intertwined. But in terms of students, I was hopeful that they would increasingly view themselves as members of a larger community that exists both locally and globally. And so that was really very challenging to do kind of in the syllabus, but with our structured reflections and our classroom discussions, we really tried to transcend the different levels of analysis there, because so many of the kind of social and political questions that weigh on each of us, whether that's gender-based violence, or climate justice, environmental issues, environmental racism, environmental justice, all of it. Those really do happen, locally as well as nationally and globally. And so we were trying to impress that upon the students. And I think that they grew in that way. I collected some data. It doesn't sound as rigorous as what Ian has done, but a combination of quantitative and qualitative narrative data to try to get at some of these objectives. I also was really wanting them to learn to work in diverse communities. Memphis is a very diverse city. Our students are really up to the challenge, I think, of kind of, enhancing their intercultural competency and learning to work kind of as members of a team. So that was another goal. And I think that they made a lot of strides toward that. I was hoping that most of them would answer in the affirmative when I asked if they were more likely after taking this course to continue to volunteer or do service work or advocacy or activism, any or all of the above. And I got 100% on that. The first time I taught the course, that everyone answered that affirmatively, which I really appreciated so much. In terms of citizenship, I feel like that is something that political scientists, that we have a lot of value added when it comes to debating and discussing kind of the nature of democratic citizenship. And so that was one of the motifs during the semester, was to make sure that we were always uh, analyzing and comparing and contrasting different forms that active citizenship can take in civicness. And so we talked a lot about service and volunteering, but also the kind of more activisty, movementy kinds of forms of getting involved, and trying to break down the seeming binaries or dichotomous understandings of one being superior to the other, and kind of positioning different forms of action in a community as kind of along a spectrum, and how our interest in one or the other can change over time, and it depends the context that we're working in. So some students felt like they were doing more service work, others were in more activisty roles in organizations, and some of them thought that they liked one or the other better initially, and then found that they actually felt more of an affinity with a different role as time went on. And so I think that I went in expecting students to push back a lot about sort of what was the best kind of community engagement, and I didn't need to worry so much about that, because it was very fluid and it was very much a work in progress for all of us. And so I think I spent needless time fretting about how to talk about these things, when in fact it just what didn't become an issue in the class. So that worked pretty well to kind of name those things in an explicit sort of way, and have those discussions all throughout the semester. So I think that the students benefited from that, as well as, again, just the local global connections, because that is so easily a buzzword, right, to talk about globalization, and that's just it becomes such a platitude and so empty so quickly if you're not careful and rigorous about that. So I was really blessed with some wonderful students who were able to do that work and to kind of accompany me on that journey, and take on that challenging task without just kind of falling into cliches and platitudinous kinds of language about what they did. So I'll stop there, guys. I'm really eager to hear from my colleagues on this one.
I guess we'll just keep with the turns, the same rotation. So I'm really glad to hear Amy talk about the student perspective. I guess what I can do is talk about the community partner perspective. I've already briefly mentioned the student, kind of why I think it's important to, bring the political science home, if you will. So the way that my class is structured, I already mentioned, has this like long Saturday component. And it's a short class, only lasts 5 or 6 weeks. And so we have 6 hours together on those days. So it's like enough to go somewhere as a class, which is a little bit different than how some other classes structure service learning. Like you give the option maybe for students to do like 10 or 15 or 20 hours. I think the accepted is 15 as the minimum to consider really, having a class be service learning, with maybe 5 hours of reflection included to total 20 hours. So we do 20 hours of actual work, but we do it together, which is a little bit different and has pluses and minuses in terms of the ways in which we interact with community partners. So there's less continuity from the students' relationship with the community partners, right? Because they only see them the one Saturday. But I've been with the same community partners for now, what is it, 16 years? It's a long time. It's a long time, and then obviously we've added some as new things, come along, and some things, people sort of stop out, community partners might stop out, or you might lose the relationship. Somebody moves on to some other organization in a different field. So it's an interesting relationship to maintain. I think for me, that's been one of the things that's the most important thing, is to maintain a good relationship between the university and the community partners. Obviously, they do, similar things, but in different ways with regards to environmental issues, because that's what I teach for the most part with the service learning and the civic engagement. So maintaining that relationship and making sure that we're doing the work that the community partner wants us to do rather than what we think is best is really, really important, which it's really easy to just kind of, and you were talking about fretting. I fret about this all the time, like I just want to make sure we're not imposing our viewpoint, we're not imposing our curriculum, to make sure there's a relationship. We want to make sure that we are doing the work that you want us to do. And for the most part, it's pretty physical. We're like, waist deep in taro patches, pulling weeds. It's muddy, it's dirty. I tell people, don't go get your nails done before this class starts because it's going to be ruined, and the community partners really appreciate the large group of students because they can get a lot accomplished in the one day, right? So there's a Hawaiian word called lalima. It means many hands working together. So it's that spirit of cooperation that is imbued into the students, and they can really actually see with their own eyes the amount of like work that many people working together can accomplish. And then the community partners have some kind of measurable, like we had this really weedy, taro patch, and now it's clear and it's ready for a family to come and, plant their taro and, feed community. We work with Native Hawaiian fish ponds. We work with, West Oahu is an Indigenous serving institution. We have the highest proportion of Native Hawaiian students and Filipino students in the 10 campus system, the 10 campus UH system. So most of my students are not only minorities, but Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, but also that's who we work with in terms of the community partners. So they have like sort of inherent relationships. We make sure we observe any kind of protocols. There's like some rigorous protocols. You have to be chanted in, you have to ask for permission to enter the space. So the students get that kind of perspective as well. And we, always try to make sure we bring gifts, to make sure that we are welcomed and we, observe all of the protocols that are expected. And then hopefully go above and beyond with the amount of work that we can do to help. And make sure that like I said, that it's what the community partners want rather than what we want to do for them. I'm sure Ian has something completely different. I think we have, the computers and the quantitative data analysis is very, very different than my students being covered in mud from head to toe. So I'm excited at how diverse, we all are.
Yeah, I definitely am thinking about ways to get my students covered in mud now. We're gonna have to figure out a way to work this into the syllabus. I'm sure that there are some, community gardens or something, urban gardens around here that we could probably do some work in. But yeah, so I would say that just to speak to all the points that Amy and Monique have both raised, the sort of benefit to students that was really a surprise to me when I started to integrate this kind of thing into my curriculum was that it allowed students a lot more freedom to bring their own ideas to projects. And I realized that in creating assignments that ask students to engage in this way, you have to necessarily, in some respects, like remove some of the structure. You need to give them the opportunity to experience things themselves and also bring their own viewpoints to the assignments and to the classroom work that we do in service of the assignments, all that stuff. And so, one project that I'll bring up as just an example of this is the exit poll that we did of Baltimore County voters in 2018. We were really interested, especially in the question of like, who are these voters? Maryland is about 60% registered Democrats, and not very many registered Republicans, on balance. And so the question is, how is it that Republican Larry Hogan is able to win in 2014, and will he win again in 2018 when we conducted the poll? And so I was very interested in this question about, partisans crossing party lines to try to vote for Hogan, all this stuff. But in the exit poll, questionnaire, I essentially it became very obvious that I would need to completely relax the construction of the questionnaire itself to engage students on the topics that they were interested in asking real voters about. And in doing so, students proposed questions on this poll that I would have never anticipated them wanting to ask voters about. And in a way, this course that began as a public opinion course, like pretty quickly became like a course in race and ethnic politics. Like it became an REP driven course because the students wanted to ask questions about people's understanding of racial groups, people's understanding of linked fate, all these kinds of concepts that we were just maybe brushing by in our syllabus. They came right in squarely to understand these things, and so the survey that we ended up conducting asked all this rich, series of questions that we ended up being able to analyze and sort of the outcome. And it was a really great experience for me as well, because I got to better understand where students were coming from in their own agenda, basically. And so allowing them to be agenda setters in this experience really allowed me then, as I continue to teach them, to retool my own work and think, okay, well, how can I better serve students in the future with my syllabi, and really, really get a deep understanding of their interests. There's other things they wanted to know about, right? Maryland, there's perceptions of climate change, all kinds of other stuff, right, that you might imagine. But yeah, there were some really strong through lines in that polling experience that were unanticipated. I'll also speak just a little bit to the faculty experience. And of course, I know we're going to get into the costs a little bit, but there were some also like surprising benefits to this for me in my career development. And I think it was especially really great because UMBC is the kind of institution that it is. Because from the very top down, I think there's a big emphasis on community engaged research right now. People really value this at my institution, and I'm very grateful for that. I know that not every institution is sort of on that wavelength, but for this institution, it was very much an emphasis. And so it was great to be able to kind of move in that direction, and then have the institution support me in those endeavors. So I know Amy mentioned a grant that she was able to get. I think Wendy also mentioned some grant support. I was also very grateful to receive a Herbowski Innovation Fund grant, which is basically a grant program that is named after the sort of preeminent president of our university, who served here for almost 35 years. A really incredible person if you don't know the name Freeman Herbowski. But that was a really, really nice sort of affirmation that this work is really valued on our campus. And it's led to some really great like media contacts. I did not expect that I would be able to sort of talk about this kind of work outside of not just the classroom, but outside the university. So for example, when we did this exit poll, we were able to write up, the students and I wrote an op-ed that we ended up publishing in the Baltimore Sun. And since that time, I've had contacts at the Baltimore Sun that know me as somebody who's doing this kind of stuff, who does public opinion. And so for faculty out there who are thinking about the sort of rewards and the consequences of spending the time to do this, there's actually, potentially some unanticipated benefits here involving kind of our public facing scholarship, right? This is surprisingly public facing, and it can allow you to make some really nice media contacts if you're able to and willing to sort of publicize right the results of what your students are doing. So yes, it sounds kind of instrumental, but I mean, that's for an institution that values that. My institution is really interested in us getting to talk to the press. They want people to be in, write op-eds, and they want people to be quoted in places. That's been a big focus in recent times. And so for this to sort of serve that purpose, as well as it is serving the students in a more authentic way, is a huge value add for me.
So I want to be sure Amy has a chance to jump in on professional benefits as well. And I wanted to kind of bring those things, I think, both the student benefit into the professional benefit side, which is that just to highlight some of the student benefits that have already been mentioned are also potential professional benefits, especially for graduate students or new faculty that are just starting out. And so that discussion of letting go of structure in certain assignments, right? If a graduate student or a new faculty member is trying to prep 4 classes per semester and prep everything at one time, this type of situation, it's often panic-inducing, perhaps, to try to get all of that done, but allowing for civically engaged or students to take the lead and help determine some aspects of the course, while it may initially be uncomfortable, can provide some space for the faculty member to not only learn from those students to improve the course in the future, but also not grade 500 million assignments all at once, due on the same day. And I'll highlight also discussion of assessment and producing reports, right? Even at an institution that might not necessarily value civically engaged work, or might put it in a service category or something like this, if you can assess your teaching or and use that as the civically engaged work as evidence for that, or you can produce reports that then can count as some form of research, or as Ian was saying, scholarly communication with the public. There's another way to involve the student benefits into professional benefits. So Amy, I wanted to make sure that we could return to your thoughts on more professional benefits.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I think that I may be in a little bit of a different position in terms of the when I started all of this. I was kind of waiting until after I was tenured, and I did that very much on purpose. And it came from, you know, being on the receiving end of the advice, don't get bogged down, and, you know, again, taking on too much teaching when research is so paramount to getting tenured, and I was mindful of that. So I think that every mentor in my life was steering me away from it. And so I guess I could have been a rebel, like the kinds of people we studied in our class, and not listened, but I did listen. But as it turned out, again, it was maybe somewhat misplaced, because I did end up getting a publication out of the deal that counted for something. You know, it could have been one of my articles or something, but instead I just delayed that. But I did get a PS Political Science and Politics article that was a nice little bonus. It also helped me connect to the teaching and learning conference community at APSA, which was so fun and wonderful. And I really enjoyed that conference when I started to attend that before COVID hit. And so that was a great professional development opportunity for myself too. But I think the bigger takeaway, though, is that for some odd reason, I had to teach so many different kinds of courses at Rhodes when I came, that I was in a predicament that I had spent a good 20 plus years from graduate school, even at master's level onward, studying social movements and civil society. It's what most of my research centered on, particularly in Latin America. And I never taught that at Rhodes College. I would smuggle it in throughout to my intro classes and my other classes. It was there, it was everywhere. Human rights and civil society pervaded all of those other syllabi, but I didn't have a designated course on those. So I think that by teaching that class, I was able to have that synergy, right? It's sort of an elusive thing, but that synergy between our research and our teaching that we talk about, especially in liberal arts environments. But in this case, it was just so satisfying and rewarding for me to make those things kind of meet. And I also used it to sort of stave off the dreaded post-tenure slump that everyone told me I would most certainly experience, and I never did. And I'm not saying this saved me from that, but I'm sure it must have helped, you know, to have something really challenging and fun and rewarding and interesting and different, and get out in the community. All of those things helped me avoid kind of that post-tenure slump, so to speak.
So thanks, Amy. And I appreciate the conversation of the whole journey, right? Everybody's been talking about the kind of intermediate, getting things to count for tenure promotion. Then once that's happened, how can we get involved there? I want to, I think, start talking about some hesitations that faculty might have, but by bringing it back and having us remember, which for me wasn't that long ago, when we were still graduate students or just getting started with this work, right? We've talked a lot about some really deep and engaging partnerships with organizations that have built up over decades of experience that y'all have. But in a graduate student or a new faculty setting, you're coming in potentially trying to finish a dissertation at the same time you're including some civic engagement work or trying to get involved with that. And it may not be something, as Amy was talking about, that advisors are recommending that you do. And similarly, you come to a new institution in a new place and are trying to figure out, what is the civic landscape here? How can I contribute? And so I wondered if we could at least start the section talking about some hesitations with thinking about hesitations to people that are, again, just getting started, and what are some of the challenges to them in taking that first step before we can develop a lot of these great longer term partnerships that have a lot of the benefits that we've been talking about. So I don't know if in continuing our format, Monique, you wanted to pick up next after Amy, and we kind of go from there about the just getting started challenges.
Sure. So I was advised not to do any of this stuff, and I did it anyway. And I did get, actually a few articles out of it that did count for tenure and promotion. My university is not a Research One university, so I think our standards of the journal tier are not the same as maybe a Research One's tenure and promotion committee might be. And so I was happy to get the publications, and I've gotten several over the years. And I think that it's interesting. I think it was Ian who mentioned, but or maybe both of you who mentioned that there is this, it's difficult to separate the teaching and research, right? And I don't think that's a bad thing, actually. Even though they, ask us to talk about our teaching, talk about our research, talk about our service in the narrative for tenure and promotion, I think sort of showing how we are whole individuals and whole faculty, and can contribute to not only the university, obviously as a long-term investment, but also the community, is all to the good. I think that is a benefit for the university, and it's also a benefit for our students, and it's a benefit for us as faculty members, understanding how that connection is created and maintained between research and teaching through civic engagement is really not only rewarding, but I think it's a really rich avenue of inquiry. And I think that we should be doing more of it. And so I don't think that starting out and thinking, oh no, I've been advised, I don't think that's necessarily the right way to go about it. I mean, everybody's different, obviously, and everybody's situation is different, and everybody's university is different, and the requirements are different everywhere for TNP. But I guess maybe our university was a little bit more flexible, so I was able to do that. I think one of the things that is interesting is I got no resources. So we say that we are, interested in community engaged scholarship and transdisciplinary scholarship, and we have an office for it and everything, but they have no resources to give to faculty. So I've asked our administration before, we need more, maybe a service learning coordinator. It would be really helpful to have all these things. We're providing all these service hours in the community. Look at all the things we're doing with no support. So this is all something that I've taken on myself. I'm the chair of the service learning subcommittee of the general education committee. We have an SL designation for classes, so to try to make it so that it's more formalized, so that faculty can actually put that on their tenure and promotion application. Yes, I have SL classes there, have a designation. I had to apply for it, and I had to jump through these hoops and so forth. So I think that, and I don't know, again, how it works elsewhere, but I think it's important that we make sure that there are resources available. Oh, sorry, my dog's. Especially for new faculty. And I don't know how to do that because I've been at it for, like I said, all these years, and I've not been able to make it happen for my own, purposes, in terms of making sure that students or community partners are even paid sometimes, to host us, that kind of thing. It's been a challenge, a real challenge. So in terms of a hesitation, that's it. How do you integrate this stuff, make sure everybody's happy in the end, make sure not only your students benefit, the community partners benefit, but you as a faculty member benefit as well, and that your path to tenure is not hindered in any way, if not benefited, so it's difficult, but it's super rewarding.
I agree. It is definitely difficult, and it is very rewarding. And I'm thinking back to my sort of first couple of semesters on the tenure track, and I mean, I think you land on campus, and I mean, I'm sure that Monique and Amy can resonate with this idea that you're pretty much lost in the sauce kind of from minute one. Just getting acquainted to campus is a very challenging thing to do. And in fact, I think that that's actually one of the reasons why it does probably benefit folks on the tenure track to wait at least a semester to begin trying these kinds of things. And that's partially because I would say that getting connected with resources on campus that are able to help you, if they are available and if they are actually, well supported and funded and able to help you, I think you need to get that layer down first. If you're going to engage in some like big shot kind of community engagement kind of ideas, or if you're going to partner with institutions, organizations, I would have never tried the stuff that I did in the data analysis course without the help of the Shriver Center at UMBC, which is essentially a bureaucracy that functions to better connect UMBC to nonprofits and to community organizations. And so those folks over there, they already knew about all of these programs. They were able to give me the heads up on, okay, these people are very well organized. They're going to respond quickly. You're not going to build your syllabus and then have them leave you off of the email chain for 3 months, and you're never going to get the data, and then your students are going to be scrambling and you have to come up with some kind of substitute assignment, and it'll be a failure. They could steer you away from organizations that maybe are flakier than others, right? And get you to the people that are really going to be good partners, because that's, I mean, I think broadly one of the really big challenges and the really big fears is that when you're doing this kind of like community engaged work, in some degree, you're handing control over your course to people that are outside of the university, and so the course sinks or swims a little bit on the basis of their buy-in. And that's scary too, because we've talked about tenure pressures for publication and all that stuff. My university, again, this is a campus that really values high quality teaching as well as it does value research. And so if you're not, getting those course evals, then that can become a problem actually for folks who are coming up at the third year review at that time. And so, that's a little bit dangerous if you wind up feeling that lack of control over your own syllabus, and students feel it too. Yeah, it's very nervy times. But at the same time, I would say like a lot of people might be thinking about this as like this very black and white thing. Like either I go full bore and I throw the kitchen sink into this and I, express my passion, which of course we want to do. It's fun and it makes us feel good. You can start really, really small. So example for this like Intro American course, one of the interventions I did was simply to change a writing assignment, as I mentioned, and just say, okay, now instead of asking you to just write sort of this expository paper about political participation, I want you to think about how you might be able to contact a representative about a political issue and sort of act as a liaison for your community and talk about things that they care about. Once they had written that, then surprise, I'll say, hey, actually, what you should do is now actually send that letter because you have identified the person, you've written the letter. And that is community engagement, right? And civic engagement as well, right? Students are actually learning a civic skill, and they're learning how to relay their preferences and the preferences of their communities to stakeholders at the political level. And it's pretty costless. I mean, you're still making them do a writing assignment and you're still grading it. And so that's the kind of thing that doesn't require you to, partner with a community organization and get students off campus and figure out how to rent one of the buses or whatever, right? All the sort of practical stuff that might make early career faculty a little bit scared. Yeah, you can start small and then continue to build those things up, especially as you learn your way around campus. And the other thing I would say is, we've got folks who have done this at various stages in the process. One really great thing that you could consider if you're starting out is to find people who have done this, maybe on your campus, maybe not, and who are at sort of more advanced stages along the career path. They'd be able to give you a lot of guidance, right? Especially if there's anybody at your university across disciplines that's thought about doing stuff like this. I benefited greatly from conversations that I had early on with folks that that care about this in my department and elsewhere. And yeah, it really helped to quell my fears because they were able to help me navigate some of the real pitfalls.
I'll give Amy a chance to discuss in a second, but I wanted to just follow up on a couple things that Ian and Monique had talked about in terms of structure and getting started. And as someone who has gotten started both as a grad student and now at two different institutions, my recommendation and kind of tying both of those things together is to think about how you can use those initial low stakes activities to help you become a more informed citizen in the community. My institutions that I've been to are all states I had never stepped foot in before I moved here. And that means that my level of knowledge or engagement with the community initially was limited. But if I can assign a project to students that says, okay, y'all may be familiar with the situation in this community and on this campus, you've been here several years, you identify a problem in an organization in the community and bring that into conversation in this class. We can talk about where you get involved in the community a bit. And then as a side benefit, I learned this organization is really responsive. They've really helped my students. That could be a good partner moving on forward. Or this organization didn't work out as well as I thought, to build up to some of those bigger activities that were mentioned. And this is a way, as Monique was talking about resources, especially at some smaller institutions and some state institutions that may not have those resources any longer, where you're the only person kind of involved in this work, to try to use your students as a network and a way to build this opportunity for you. And in my experience, the partners are really excited about that when you help control, controlled chaos, help control the students that are going out and making those connections. But then when they see them first and in this very small capacity, and I come back later, say, let's do something bigger, they've at least had an experience with me. So I thought maybe that would tie together a little bit, both what Monique and what Ian were saying. Amy, did you want to add any other challenges or hesitations in terms of getting started along these lines?
Sure, absolutely. I won't say anything more about the institutional resources that are needed because both Monique and Ian covered that very well. And I couldn't agree more. I mean, Rhodes is without a Center for Civic Engagement or Community Engaged Learning or Research, or we just don't have it. And so the first time I set up my course, I had to meet with the Bonner Center coordinator, actually, because we had a Bonner Center for Faith and Service. And so it's just basically an individual who had good relationships to a lot of community partners. And it just sort of was at that individual personal level and went from there. So yes, that's really, really important. And I guess since I'm the international studies person, on the call, I would also add that I think that having connections to the study abroad or international education folks is really necessary. And again, the institutionality just is not there for that. But we should really be doing community engaged learning overseas as part of a study abroad experience, or Maymesters, summer opportunities. So I hope one day we'll have that on our campus. But I did want to mention that some of my biggest challenges were kind of more on the community partner side, just having to do that on my own without a lot of support, going and meeting folks, feeling like I was taking up their time, feeling just nervous about that, that imposition. I think Monique might have used a word like that. And some of the organizations that I most wanted to partner with ended up being close to collapsing at one time or another. They didn't seem to have a location anymore. They just had like the shell of a website and not a lot of seeming activity or news. Problems with their board, problems with leadership and staffing, no resources. I mean, so some of the organizations that would have been sort of perfect for my class, I'm being selfish here by characterizing them that way, but you know what I mean. Wonderful opportunities for the students. We're in a state of free fall. And then this is before COVID even. So add COVID and the pandemic issues to the mix, and it got really tough. So that gave me a moment of pause in terms of how do I have enough organizations or the right kind or whatever to send students to. So that was another challenge. None of these challenges are insurmountable. None of them would dissuade me from continuing in this work. So I want to be really clear about that. And then the other challenge, which is just an ongoing one with this kind of work, I think Monique also spoke to this, is just always kind of working with the students and having those discussions where we center all of our work in humility, going in humbly, willing to serve and plug in as needed. That's something that I think we have to always address. No savior complexes allowed, no fixers, like, oh, that NGO isn't very well run, or oh, that was a chaotic place, or oh, I showed up and the door was locked and there was nobody there and I didn't get my hours in and this is a big inconvenience for me. Like all of that needs to be checked. And so that took a lot more time and emotional labor than I anticipated going in. So I throw that out. Again, not a deal breaker, not something that would make me not do this in the future.
We've talked a little bit about this, but approaches and how they've changed over time. But I wanted to hit on that more intentionally. And I think, Amy, you were just kind of mentioning some of that, which is maybe you're coming in thinking about civic engaged work from one perspective, and in doing it, kind of transition to some other perspectives or get a better sense yourself of what you're doing in this work and why it's valuable. So I wanted to give you all a chance to kind of reflect over how, since you've started the civically engaged work, has your approach changed, and why have you been motivated to make some of those changes to the way you're thinking about doing civically engaged work? So maybe Monique, could you start us off?
Sure. I mean, yeah, I think I've learned a ton over these last years. I mean, yeah, it's been almost 2 decades, and I think having I mean, I did not that I started out with a savior complex by any means, but I definitely was like, had ideas about what the students would accomplish. And now I've definitely taken a step back and, have the community partners lead the way. I think that there is more of a structure, the nonprofit organization structure in place. It's just more common. There's just more environmental groups focused on sustainability, and with regards to my classes, focused on the food system. And so there's, institutional support on the nonprofit side so that they can be more effective leaders in this relationship. That maybe it was a little bit more chaotic. I like that word, Amy, because I think that's, it was a little bit of the Wild West. When I first started, it's not food. The politics of food wasn't really something that we thought about. The food system wasn't really something that we thought about in any kind of structured way. And so now there's something that we talk about. We know about local food and why it's important. And so there's just more of a narrative that's kind of, underneath everything that's supporting the actual action, the actual work that we're doing, the actual civic engaged work. So I think that change, that shift over time has enabled me to shift the way that I view not only, like I said, the relationship with community partners, but what the students are meant to be doing and how they're meant to be benefiting from that experience. And I think that's been really an interesting shift for me, because I've had to sort of take a step back and go, whoa, check yourself, Monique. Are you sure that this is how you want to, approach this situation? And yeah, of course, there are partnerships that sort of fall apart for a variety of reasons, and that's okay. Maybe we didn't do what they wanted us to do in the way they wanted us to do it. Or people move on, people, it's been so long, like people get other jobs, people go on maternity leave, never come back, whatever, so it's been a series of experiences that, in every single experience I learn from, and I try to make it better for the next time around. I think that's something that I've really benefited from in terms of myself in my relationship to the community partners, but also to my teaching, right? Okay, this was successful, was it? I don't know. Maybe what could we have done better? How can we improve the situation the next time around? I think that's a really, I didn't come into it with that attitude, and now that's the baseline, right? That is like, okay, like we're doing this, we've done it before, but like, can we make it better? Can we make the relationship better? Can we improve the student experience, the community partner experience? How can we improve every time? And so You know, I've learned I'm not a native Hawaiian speaker. I've learned the chants. My singing voice is awful, but I persevere because it's the right thing to do, you know. So all these things, you know, we improve every time. I make sure that the students are prepared. You know, we practice ahead of time, like all these things that we didn't do before, so that it makes the community partners feel comfortable, and we can sort of go start with a really good baseline for the relationship. I think that's really specific to Hawaii, maybe. Obviously, you know, I'm assuming that maybe you don't do chants before you send your students to do exit polls, but it is something to consider, I guess, you know, sort of the cultural aspects that need to be honored and respected. So yeah, I've tried to sort of improve on that as I go along. But yeah, I've been at it for a long time. Somebody who's new, and I do, you know, I just want to sort of go back really quickly. I do agree with both Ian and Amy, like, you know, don't start your first semester, you know, but definitely sort of get a sense of what's available and what's out there. And you're right, there's different resources. And then you can put your best foot forward. I think that's really kind of the, you know, and be open to making mistakes and learning from them.
Yeah, I'll be brief and just saying that, you know, I think one thing I've really learned is just that students are going to guide the experience, and I don't need to have any preconception about the universe of content that we need to cover in a specific syllabus or a specific course, and that the experience is going to be tailored and it's going to be individual to every one of these groups. But that's in some ways in service of their broader interests, because they're you know, they're going to use the stuff that they care about more in their futures than the stuff that I'm trying to sort of shove at them, right? And so, you know, there's things that, you know, a few years ago, probably as somebody who just came out of graduate school would think, oh, it's complete anathema to leave this, you know, core reading by the wayside. But sometimes, you know, these are things that, you know, you can make reference to, you can bring in those ideas in other ways. And of course, so yeah, definitely as I've gained experience as an instructor and I felt a little bit more of my sea legs in the classroom, it's allowed me to just really just settle down and kind of let the students again sort of guide the experience and contribute to sort of a more democratic learning environment that's been, I think, to our mutual benefit. I'd also say that just again, like as I get more capable of understanding the institution and the challenges and the potential opportunities, you know, you eventually run into walls, and you're like, why are we not doing this? And you realize that there are many people before you that have tried to invent that wheel and have failed, right? And so I've learned to be a little bit more careful in navigating the institution and understanding like why there are certain you know, things that people just don't try or don't do. But at the same time, also thinking about, you know, if you've got the energy, you've got the sort of passion for it, and you've got the resources at your disposal, you can potentially kick down some of those walls in a strategic way. You can't kick down every wall on campus, or else, you know, you will collapse or it will collapse. One or the other is going to happen. But so like, for example, you know, I'm really, you know, my eye is a lot more on DC these days. I'm really interested in getting students more involved in that. You know, we do a lot in our department in Maryland politics. We have a very strong presence in Annapolis. Our students are interning there constantly. I mean, the Speaker of the House of Delegates in Maryland is a proud UMBC alumnus. We've got a lot of connections in Annapolis, but surprisingly less sort of volume of student experience in the capital setting. And it's really a shame because we're 30 miles away. And so, you know, that's one thing I've tried to think about, is how to be strategic with my resources, but also to like set my sights maybe on kind of the next level and kind of where we might be able to target next as a department and as a campus, you know, and my sort of contributions to that playing a small role.
Amy, do you want to finish us out on how approaches have changed over time?
Sure. I'm really glad Ian mentioned content of courses, because I think that probably transcends all of my teaching, all of my courses that I've offered over the years, is a kind of a sifting and winnowing and maybe letting go of things that I used to think had to be included, whether again it was an empirical case study, a certain region, a theory, or you know, whatever perspective. And I think with this class too, I just had to have it be a lot less ambitious, because the first iteration I wanted to do everything from, women workers in Mexico and refugees resettling in Germany and Sweden and immigrants' rights activism in the US and the indignados and the right to housing mobilizations in Spain. And I mean, it just was endless. Black Lives Matter was really important. Me Too. Just so many movements were resonant at that time with students. And so I think I just really had to let a lot of those case studies go and focus more on, again, the community engaged piece and making sure we were doing our structured reflection and discussion in class, and added some fun experiential learning within the class, like a training session where we sort of get to embody different roles, like the protesters and the contentious folk versus the more lobbying folks who go and, petition for change, and versus other kinds of people who just volunteer and meet the immediate needs of a community. And just trying to get more of that in the class, and not worrying so much about content. But it's hard because we love us our content. We just want to do it all in a class, and you just can't. But that goes again for all my classes.
Well,
Can I ask a question though? Sorry, can I ask a question? Because I feel like I totally understand what you're saying about letting go of the content. But don't you feel in your course evaluations, this is referencing, teaching is important. I think it's valued probably at all three of our institutions. Don't you feel like the course evaluation comments, the qualitative comments especially, will refer to the ways in which the service learning and the civic engagement piece of the course really drove home the content way more than some article, that you thought was indispensable? And I feel like that's the part that maybe we haven't really talked about, but I mean, isn't that the whole point of our job, is to like help students learn and really just kind of walk away with, this like set of critical thinking skills that is going to serve them for the rest of their lives, and they're going to be, engaged citizens forever. That I think that's the whole point. I don't know. At least it is to me. And I think that the concept of, what we're doing clearly in different ways, which is super cool, in our own ways, is really just the common denominator, really, in the end, is like, are they not just getting something really, really valuable out of these experiences? Way more than, the last theory that you thought was, oh my God, I can't go without,
No, for sure. I think you're exactly right. That is the great hope. And I guess I would sort of quote like feminist scholar Cynthia Enloe, who wrote an important piece some years ago about how the personal is political is international, right? Like just always asking them to think about those things simultaneously. So yes, I certainly hope that's the case. I mean, it's hard to really know, right? Like, because they do expect a lot, they expect to learn kind of, again, more empirics, more theoretical lenses, and then add in the community engaged sort of dimension of it too, kind of putting knowledge and values into conversation, kind of a search for meaning and all of that. It's just a lot to kind of go into one semester, and that I think speaks to an additional challenge, which is the sort of sinking feeling that you're abandoning the partners at the end of the semester. So I just wanted to sort of name that. I'm sure there are people who have found a way to get around that, but we have an academic calendar and time frame, and then we have the one that the world uses that has nothing to do with our artifice of a semester or a Maymester or whatever term. And so that too is something that I just wanted to throw out, that I haven't figured that out yet or solved that issue.
I hesitate to cut off the conversation, but in the interest of keeping everything to some time, I think this was a great conclusion, which was one, for graduate students and new faculty, reminding ourselves that this is an iterative process, and that we in this conversation today are all in some stages of still iterating through that process, right? And we're coming in with ambitions that change over time, and keeping both those ambitions in mind as an end goal, but also then keeping them and trying to keep them in check, and negotiating and navigating all of these challenges is a really important feature. And what I think we learned, not only in terms of from the session some inspiration from the panelists, and some guidance, but also some ways to concretely get started in terms of helping students, getting them having a role guiding the discussion and releasing some of that control as a method of getting started. Also finding mentors, being clear about what resources, doing that investigatory work, and then seeing, well, where can I fit in within that context that already exists? Before then maybe down the line, we can start kicking down walls, as Ian was mentioning. But building that process and keeping us all in conversation, I think, is a really good takeaway from this session today. And I want to thank all three of y'all for being willing to come on and speak to your experiences across, again, a wide variety of institutions. And that I think speaks to the broad nature of civic engagement work and the many ways that you can find an entry foray into doing this important contribution for your professional, for student lives, and for the community. So thank you all very much. And I look forward to future conversations and panels on this series about introducing civic engagement for new faculty and new graduate students into teaching and research.